Welcome back. I want to continue thinking about and providing some examples of these classroom assessment techniques, these CATS, C-A-T-S. Before we do that though, let's think about how novices think versus experts. Typically, and recognize that your students are novices. To be an expert, it takes lots of experience. Your students are going to be novices, even if they're in their fourth year, all right? Typically, the way a novice learns things is in a segmented manner. So they might learn these three things and they might recognize that there's some relationship between them. And then in another time in your module, and they might learn these three things and these four things and so on. They might even recognize there's some linear relationship amongst these. But very, very limited. They don't see the bigger picture. An expert, on the other hand, we see things, because we are experts, in hierarchical form. We also see that there's lots of connections amongst things. We also recognize that some of these things, I've got different colors here, some of these things are not equivalent. So this, whatever that piece of information or knowledge is not equivalent to this one, it's not equivalent to that one. And we start to see the bigger picture and connections. So part of our goal of getting our students to think critically, to think at higher levels, is starting to get them to move down to this level, to see those connections and how that happens. So some of these classroom techniques, that's what we're doing, is we're asking them to not simply topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, topic 4, but actually what are the connections amongst those things. So that's part of what classroom assessment techniques are helping us to do. This, by the way, is from the Ambrose book, How Learning Works, 2010. This model of novice versus expert. I introduced this book to you before, and you've got several of these in your packet, and I'm just very quickly going to give you some examples of a memory matrix, categorizing grid, and defining features matrix. So let's get started. Remember, first of all, the idea that we have this integrated model of learning goals, feedback and assessment, and then teaching and learning activities, and how all these things work together in all directions. And so we're still focusing kind of on the teaching and learning activities in terms of these classroom assessment techniques, but they also are assessments. And they should be related to the goals, the learning goals, and so on. Okay, memory matrix. This is really just the row and column headings represent useful categorizing variables for important information from a lesson. This is from one that might be, in fact, this is from your handout, a type of physiology course. I think this was from someone teaching a introductory nursing course. So different parts of the gastrointestinal tract, mouth, esophagus, etc. down here, structure, function, and enzyme. So basically the student would just fill in, okay, what's the structure of the mouth? What's the function of the mouth, etc. Stomach, what's the structure? What's the function? What kinds of enzymes might we find that are secreted in the stomach? And so on and so forth. So they're filling in the blanks with a few words, maybe some phrases. Make sure, though, that when they're finished, that you provide some feedback. Oh, yes. So this is not exactly like grading like an exam. It's providing feedback from it. You say, well, you're really not very strong on these enzyme things. Maybe you need to go back and look at those more carefully. Or maybe I, as the instructor, need to spend a little bit more time talking about those enzymes, because I've seen what the students have done and realized, I don't think they got the enzyme part very well. Maybe I should go back and do a better job of teaching that. That's called a memory matrix. Again, it can be done in class, it can be done as a take-home assignment, it can be done in helping them as they read through notes or readings and so on. What level of Bloom's taxonomy is this? They have to remember, they have to understand, maybe a little bit apply. If you're thinking about the total of the gastrointestinal tract, I suppose there's a little bit of analysis too, because they're looking at the total, looking at the different parts and how these things fall into those different parts. But primarily remember and understand, very lower levels. Defining features. This is one I use sometimes, again, to help students just learning vocabulary and basic definitions. So this is what I would say to the students. In this case, be sure that you understand the defining features or definitions of the terms listed below. So I teach something on milk ejection from the mammary gland. So these are different components of that that pathway and different things related to it, hormone oxytocin, the milk ejection hormone, etc. What are the defining features? What's the definition of this, and how does it relate to this process of milk ejection, this physiological process? I've even gone to even putting in blank terms. You, the student, decide what other words did you come up with here that you learned. Put that in. That's fine. That's yours. This is one I give to them as they're watching the lecture videos, they're in lecture, they're going through their notes. I do not necessarily even grade these. This is really to help the students go back and say, oh yes, I remember what the myoepithelial cells are and what they do, because I've written that in there. What level of Bloom's taxonomy? Again, very low level. Remember, understand, that's pretty much what the level at which they are working for this one. Okay, a minute thesis, and this can be used in a variety of different ways. In this particular example, 2 columns representing 2 dimensions of the content. So again, I teach about hormones involved in mammary growth and function and development, and then there are stages of mammary development: fetal stage, prepubertal, et cetera, lactogenesis, lactation. So what you would do is you'd put these on the board: hormones, a list of hormones; stages of development, the list of those stages. And you'd ask the student, okay, come up here, and I want you to you pick, you the student, you pick, which of these? You pick a hormone and then 2 different stages. So they might say, okay, prolactin, and they draw a line over to the prepubertal stage of mammary development. Draw another line to lactogenesis. Okay, now you guys write a minute paper. I'll give you a minute. It actually ends up being 2 or 3 minutes. 2 or 3 sentences, 3 or 4 sentences, something like that, describing what's the relationship between this hormone and this stage of development compared to this hormone, same hormone, versus this stage of development. You can have them turn those in. You can just use it as a writing assignment. You might have it go through it again, or you can use it as a point of discussion. Okay, let's talk about this. Somebody wanted to, in the class, now that the student has identified these, somebody wanted to describe to me how prolactin relates to prepubertal stage of development, and so on. You can have them do it again. Maybe another student comes up and says, okay, what's the relationship between estrogen and fetal development, estrogen during on the mammary gland during pregnancy? You can use these in all sorts of different ways, right? Discussion, minute papers, a brief homework assignment, et cetera, et cetera. What level of Bloom's taxonomy are they working here? Well, they have to remember, understand, probably a little bit of apply, but they're really starting to work at those upper levels because they're starting to put together things. They're starting to make some evaluations. Well, this hormone maybe doesn't work down on this other level. Maybe it works only here. So they're starting to work at those upper levels, doing a little bit more critical thinking of the relationship of these with these. So this one is this minute thesis, this idea of these 2 columns is a little bit higher expectation of what level at which they are thinking. Categorizing grid. This again is one from I use in my class. So I teach a part of my a unit in my module. My lactation biology module relates to a disease in the mammary gland called mastitis, an inflammation or infection of the mammary gland. And so what I've done here is I put different items, different things that relate to that disease, and then do those relate to detection of the disease, treatment, control of the disease, prevention of the disease. And here, if a 0 means they're not directly related, somewhat related is 1 plus, 2 pluses is directly associated. So they fill this thing out. All right, so wearing plastic gloves, well, not detection, somewhat treatment, but especially controlling to make sure you're not passing those pathogens from one cow to another cow to another cow, et cetera. And then also prevention. And so they do this. There are better answers than others. They're not necessarily absolutely wrong answers. But it forces them to do, they have to remember, they have to understand, but they also have to do a lot of evaluating and analyzing, don't they? They have to make a judgment here. Okay, let's say bulk tank somatic cell count. Let's see, does it have anything to do with detection? Yeah, okay, and it's a lot to do with detection. Not so much with these other things. They're making a judgment. So again, what level of Bloom's taxonomy are they working when they're doing this kind of activity? Multiple levels actually, but especially getting up into those higher levels. So feedback and assessment of learning, teaching and learning activities, these CATs, these classroom assessment techniques, certainly they are assessments and they can be activities. And we've just shown you several examples of those. And of course, they all need to be aligned with the learning goals that you have for your course, for that particular lesson. CATs are a means of getting the students to work and learn at various levels. They are the thing that they're doing in that classroom. Recall in student-centered learning, as opposed to lecture where they're just sitting passively and listening, students are actually doing something. They're engaged in the learning process. They're active. What are they doing? They're doing these. They're doing the CATs, and they're working at various levels of Bloom's taxonomy.